Thank you, Tyler. I turned myself into a boat after spending 14 months in the Kingdom of Bhutan. I had sailed around the planet, from the desert to the Himalayas and back again. I was invited to teach youth about contemporary sculpture and art in public spaces. And of course, I realized fairly quickly that my understanding of what that would entail was so far from what it actually means to teach contemporary art in the remote Himalayas. There had been no exposure to contemporary art in the country ever when I arrived. It wasn't until 1999 that internet landed in the remote kingdom. There was only one road that connected the entire country. My home base was to be in the capital city of Thimphu, which at that time was the country's only urban community. I began my adventure living in a 3-generation household on top of a mountain, waking up every morning to touch the clouds and slide down monsoon-drenched dirt paths to get to more dirt paths, to get to a main dirt road, to get to a taxi that took me to town. After a few months, I decided to live just 5 feet from the main road, in the attic of what we called an outlaw building, across the street from Changjiji, Thimphu's government housing complex. I was to be the first foreigner ever to work independently in Changjiji. Now, it took about 48 hours for me to realize that in this place, in this totally foreign, unrecognizable place, I was a transplant. I had sailed around the world alone, and brave as I might have decided to be, I needed a guide. I needed a translator. I had to deconstruct everything and redefine what my world was to me. And if I was to teach contemporary art, I had to abandon that definition too, and adapt. It was in Bhutan that I learned my life's most valuable lesson as an artist. It was in Bhutan that I learned that adaptation and reflection are the drivers of our most crucial role in 21st century society. Artists are translators. We are the world's most valuable translators because we don't need words to translate the human experience. We can speak without speaking. Art is our language. Now, all the world has a right to be fluent in art. It is, in fact, a language, and if a community can't access it, can't understand it, can't create it or generate it, and most importantly, can't relate to it, then that community will not thrive, will not participate in or contribute to the very evolution of humanity in the 21st century. Art is the only universal language that we have. It's the only language that can connect all of you to one another. Now, it's important to mention that I'm speaking specifically about contemporary art because by practice, it's explorative, it's process-based, it's a tool for dissection, it's participatory, and most importantly, it is defiant of any boundary or structured discipline that exists. It is driven by collaboration and adaptation. So an artist is able to move beyond simple dictation and interpretation to create generative processes that are triggered by questions. After nearly 10 years working as an artist educator on street level, I'm driven by El Paso's need for artist-led action that generates cultural evolution. We must find a language that breaks through the barriers that stifle this community's potential future. A progression must occur of language, symbols, and ideas in the 21st century. Who is the Cesar Chavez of our time? Why do artists not celebrate her? If there is no equivalent, artists must examine why such a figure is missing when the need for that activism is as great as it was in the 80s. Where are the representations of real, living border crossers of the 21st century? Actual living, breathing, hybrid beings. Our community has the artistic tools to push the representations of that part of our story? Can we not capture every sound one might hear as they cross the border? Take those sounds and augment them and manipulate them and share them with the world? Can we not create a painting of the more than 65 million footsteps that cross this border every year? Does this type of language not translate our story to the rest of the world? Does this type of language not allow us to participate in a global conversation? Our language must evolve beyond simple, literal stories, to explore broad spectrums of ideas and identities and experiences. Can we not build boats adapted to sail through the desert, to speak of survival at all costs? Can we not create new symbols that reflect instead of declare? We sailed through the streets of central El Paso on a fleet of boats made during a tropical storm in Kansas City. The boats were born of water, but they were made for the desert. They were adapted to sail through this desert. They were brought home as an offering. They were brought home to be shared in public, on the street, with everyone for free. They were an offering to anyone who drove by or walked by, anyone who stopped and stared or stopped and talked. They were an offering to every child who'd never been on a boat in their life. In El Paso, languages blur on the daily, so it becomes the role of the artist to find common language. The question becomes, how does an artist, how does a translator create work for a community who has never seen contemporary art, who doesn't speak that language? How does an artist teach the world to speak without speaking? The first thing we do is identify meaning for common things, shared pieces of the human experience. What is your world? How do you define it? What's important to you, and why is that important? The second thing we do is create meaning beyond what is a given. We redefine. We find new associations for common things. It's a simple teaching in symbols and metaphors, but when an artist teaches this lesson, we do so through object making and action. We don't need words. The third thing an artist does is explore, to find different representations of the same things. In Bhutan, we went to the landfill. We were preparing for a public exhibition on waste in Bhutan, and it took me about 2 weeks to realize that my students had no concept of what waste actually meant in relation to their way of life. The connection was missing. And so we hopped on a bus, and then we hitched a ride on some dump trucks, and we rode for miles and miles to the top of the mountain, to the country's largest landfill. When we arrived, they saw a mountain of garbage. And when I asked them what it looked like, they said a mountain of garbage, except one cunning Ugyen who said, "Note, look at this trash. It is falling like water. This is an ocean wave." So we made a boat. I was asked by a fellow artist if I had considered that no one in Bhutan has any concept or relationship to a boat. I giggled weeks later when the students came running to tell me that the neighbors had filled the boat with trash. They said, "Certainly now, madam, this boat will sink in a sea of garbage." That was the moment, the unmistakable moment when a fundamental exchange of ideas occurred. They had become translators. They had no idea how significant or special that was. And here I am still smiling. What they did know, though, was that were it not for the neighbors and the garbage, that boat would have been a simple sculpture of a simple thing. And so the last thing an artist does is bring their translations to life. We put them to action. We make them live and breathe. It is possible that a simple image of ancient paddy fields can be projected on the buildings of a government housing complex to translate an idea to the world of the loss of culture, to translate the idea of humanity's evolution, to translate the idea of the passage of time. Now, through a process like this, and in a community like ours, the inevitable question is raised of what an artist does, what a translator does, when a community seems to be complacent. You give them no choice. You put it right in front of them, right in their face, right before their eyes and ears. You remove any and all perceived boundaries. In 2013, we've co-founded the Caldo Collective for that exact reason. The collective exists for the single purpose of creating connections between artists and the communities they live in. Real, tangible bridges. Currently, 6 artists are working together to lay the groundwork for the activation of accessible public art in the historic Manhattan Heights neighborhood. The exhibition is to be the first experiment of what we call the Transient Triangle Project. We have written a poem, and we plan to take over an alley with it. The goal of the exhibition is to take all of our different artistic languages, let's call them dialects, and teach the community to speak art. We've written a simple poem about life in their world. We've asked them to tell us what it means to them. We've included them to the extent that we've asked them to submit sound, video, images of what El Paso is in their life. We're taking those different samples and creating conceptual soundscapes. We're using them to create movement for performances. We're using them to create video and the narratives that will unfold in paintings. We want to know what this world is to them. We've given them a very simple poem and asked them to translate it through our work for themselves. We're asking them to give us their own meaning. So essentially, we're processing their language, translating it using our different dialects, and giving it back. We're giving them synonyms. Ultimately, and hopefully, without even knowing that they've done it, possibly, they've learned to speak a new language through our translations, and more importantly, through their own. Now, if they learn to speak art, all of the world will be changed. Just as I had to learn to translate when I went to Bhutan, any person who's never seen a work of contemporary art has to learn too. Books cannot teach it. Only artists can. The role of the artist in the community becomes the role of the artist with the community. No one can be expected to engage in something that speaks to them instead of speaking with them. In a community like ours, these translations, this artwork, becomes our most valuable asset for the reinvention of border culture in the 21st century. Artists' work becomes the conversation. The art itself is the translation. Once artists tap into that, once they understand that, the world will begin to change. To think of engaging a community through the arts without treating the art itself as a conversation would be like trying to grow flowers without water. Our communities need more conversations. We need more translators.